Today I'm going to attempt to explain why I've got not one, not two, but 6 first aid kits. Don't worry, it's not as crazy as it sounds. Let me try and explain. Welcome back, and if you're watching this at the time the video first came out, a very happy new year to you all. It kind of struck me that a lot of you probably got power tools and other dangerous things for Christmas, so it's about time we covered a little bit about workshop safety on this channel. Now, this is always a subject that is tricky to talk about because safety, it's so boring. But trust me, if you're playing with table saws and routers and other things like that on a daily basis, it is a subject you absolutely need to take seriously. At the end of the day, pretty much everything in a joiner's workshop is designed to cut and shape wood, and wood is pretty hard. So if you've got any tool capable of cutting or shaping wood, then it will also be very capable of cutting and shaping humans. So this is the start of a brand new mini-series all about workshop safety in a small workshop, especially if you're working on your own like I do. And one of the first things you need to get sorted out is a first aid kit, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Now, I'm a bit squeamish, so don't worry, we're not going to be showing any blood or grotesque wounds or anything like that in these videos. Even talking about it is a bit of a challenge for me. So the first problem with first aid in a small workshop is that if you really need first aid, you're probably not going to be able to administer it by yourself. So my first tip is to keep your mobile phone with you and charged at all times. I've got a pocket at the front of my work pants where my phone lives all the time. Nothing else lives in that pocket other than my mobile phone. Make sure you know how to dial an emergency contact using only one hand, and make sure if you're using fingerprint recognition to get into your phone, make sure you can unlock your phone with either hand. Most mobiles these days will let you make an emergency call without even unlocking the phone. Another thing you can do if you've got any Bluetooth device in your workshop is make sure it's paired with your phone, and that as long as your phone is near that Bluetooth device, your phone is always unlocked. I've also got 999 pre-programmed as an emergency contact on my phone. It's set in the speed dials page, and I've got a shortcut to it on the desktop of the phone itself. You might also be able to program up voice control on your phone or Amazon Echo or whatever to dial an emergency contact. I wouldn't put too much faith in that though, because at the end of the day it's a tricky thing to test, and if when the time comes and you're stressed and your voice isn't sounding normal like your voice normally sounds because you've got a limb hanging off, if you're telling Alexa to call an ambulance and it actually tells you what the weather's like, it's going to get quite frustrating. So in the event of a serious accident, the 3 things you're going to try and do. First of all, you're going to try and stem the bleeding, either by putting pressure on the wound or by using a tourniquet or something like that to try and minimize blood loss. Secondly, you're going to dial your emergency contact and get help as quickly as possible. And thirdly, you're going to try to alert someone nearby, whether it's a neighbour or even flagging a car down or something like that, because you're going to need someone to look after you while you're waiting on help to arrive. Now, in a serious situation like that, a first aid kit is going to be of minimal help. But for slightly less fatal wounds and cuts and your typical sort of middle of the road workshop injuries, a first aid kit is absolutely essential. So let me just take you through why I've got 6 first aid kits. Firstly, I've got 2 in my workshop, one there and one down there near the floor. I've then got a 3rd standard first aid kit in the house. If I've hurt myself and my wife's around, then the first thing I'm going to do is go crying to her, and she'll need some sort of first aid kit so that she can help. I've also got a first aid kit that permanently lives in my truck. I keep it under the seat. It's fully stocked at all times just in case I need it. I've then got a separate tub of first aid stock that I keep in the house. When you buy a pre-packaged first aid kit, you'll often get like 15 bandages or something, and unless you're planning on getting into actual human mummification, this is probably overkill for a single incident. So I like to keep all of my spare stuff like cleaning wipes and spare elastoplasts and extra bandages and stuff like that, all live in a totally separate pot away from the primary first aid kits. And then it's really easy to top up the main first aid kits when I need to. And then finally, if you're anything like me and you've got first aid kits dating back to the 1980s, I don't recommend having stuff that's really old in your primary first aid kit. There's a reasonable chance the bandages will just disintegrate, they're not likely to be sterile anymore, and I just generally wouldn't recommend using them. But you don't have to put them in the bin. What I do is I get all of the old plasters and old bandages and stuff and I put them into a toy first aid kit, and my young daughter loves wrapping up her dolls and soft toys in bandages and doing a bit of kind of, you know, hospital play and doctor play and that sort of thing. As I say, I've got 2 first aid kits in the workshop. They're both bright pink old detergent boxes, so they're very easy to see. One lives at bench height and the other one lives at floor height. The reason being that if I've collapsed on the floor and I can't stand up for whatever reason, hopefully I can reach the kit that's at floor height. This one also has a couple of extra things in it, so I'll refer to this one as the clot pack, and I'll talk about that a bit more later on. What I also like to do is to remove all of the surplus packaging from everything in your first aid kit. The only packaging left is the stuff needed to keep things sterile. When you need to use your first aid kit, what I'd suggest you do is you just empty the entire contents out in front of you, so you can search through and find the most appropriate thing that you need to fix yourself, whether it's bandages or plasters or, you know, steri strips or whatever. You certainly don't want to be mucking on trying to get stuff out of packages when you're probably not thinking straight anyway. So I'll take you through the basic contents first. These are identical in both packs. What you can probably do is buy one decent standard first aid kit and then share the contents out between 2 packs. Although a lot of the stuff in here doesn't come in a normal first aid kit and I've bought the components separately. So I'll include links to everything I can in the description below. As I say, just be careful not to have too much stuff in your first aid kit that you're not likely to need. When you need to use this, you're probably not going to be in a clear state of mind, so you want to keep things as simple as possible. So we'll work kind of from the bottom up and I'll explain what everything is. So we've got a couple of standard medium sterile dressings. These are both 12 centimeters by 12 centimeter dressings here. So we've got 2 of those. We've also got up here an iPad, so very similar to this, but obviously smaller and designed to go on the eye. We've got sterile cleansing wipes here, alcohol free. What are they? They're 8 by 10 centimeter sterile cleansing wipes. We've got steri strips or steroplasts. These are really good. They're just very good for wound closure type situations. If you've got quite a deep wound, you can use these to stick the wound back together to a degree. These come in, I think there's like 5 in one pack, and I've got 1, 2, 3, I've got 5 of those 25 steri strips, which is more than enough. Very handy to have. These are 3mm by 75mm ones, so you can get them in different sizes, but I think that's quite a good size for in a workshop. We've got non-adherent dressing pads, so I've got a selection of sizes of these: 10 by 10, 7.5 by 7.5, and 5 by 5. Again, these are really handy for putting on a wound prior to putting a bandage on, or even stuffing into a wound, depending on how bad the wound is. Up here, we've got a bog standard triangular non-woven bandage. We've got 2 lots of sterile eye wash. We've got some micro-pore surgical tape, a bunch of safety pins for tying bandages together and whatnot. We've got an old kind of medical pamphlet thing. Again, in an emergency situation, you're not going to be in a state of mind to read or digest the information in that, but it gives you something to read while you're waiting on help to arrive, if nothing else. And then we've got a range of plasters. Now in the States, I think you call these Band-Aids. In the UK, we call them plasters or elastoplasts. I think elastoplast is the brand name. It's one of those things where people in the UK just refer to them as elastoplasts. I would tend to suggest dumping all the ones that came in your first aid kit and giving them to your kids to play with, and buying some decent branded plasters to go into your proper first aid kits, because often the ones that come supplied with the cheaper first aid kits are rubbish, but it depends on what sort of first aid kit you get. So as I say, all of this, I've got exactly the same contents in both boxes. We've then got some extra things in my clotting pack that I keep lower down on the floor, because this is generally going to be a much worse situation if I can't even stand up. So in this kit, exactly the same as before, but the extra things we've got a military grade clotting sponge here. These are quite expensive, so I've only got one of these, but make sure you read the instructions on the back of the packet so you're familiar with how they work. If you've got one hand out of action, you're going to open this with your teeth. I've also got some rubber gloves, a big tube of antiseptic cream, some scissors, which you might need for cutting clothing off or all sorts of situations where you might need scissors. Some thread. Thread's really handy because you can use it in conjunction with super glue to close up wounds, or you can even put some super glue on the thread and wrap it round your finger to, if you've got a deep cut on your finger, as long as you don't wind it too tight that you're going to cut the blood supply off. But there's all sorts of things that you can do with thread. Jimmy DeResta has already done an excellent video all about using super glue and thread to close wounds. I shall include a link in the description to that. I'm not going to explain it all again. I don't keep super glue in this box because I keep super glue on my shelf in the workshop and I always know where it is. If you don't have a good home for your super glue, I would suggest you keep an extra little pot of super glue in your first aid kit because it's very handy to have. Finally, I've got 3 homemade tourniquets. It's just a loop of cotton fabric and a strong dowel known as a windlass to tighten it up. They're very simple to make, or you can buy purpose-made ones off the internet. A word of caution though, I've read many reviews of bad quality cheap imports that just break when you tighten them up. You're probably not going to know if they work until you try them in anger, so for me they're just not worth the risk. If you are going to buy a purpose-made one off the internet, make sure it's a military grade tourniquet from a trusted seller. Don't take the risk on a cheap imported tourniquet, because if it doesn't work, it is literally the difference between life and death. And that's generally why I prefer to go old school with something like this. I've got one that's about arm width and 2 that are about leg width. You can put 2 on one arm if you need to. And remember, a tourniquet is there to stem arterial bleeding. Only ever use them on limbs. Don't use them on your neck or anything like that. They're very simple to use. You put it on your arm or leg further up from the wound, away from joints, and you keep turning the windlass until the bleeding stops. You don't release it until professional help arrives. Don't use cable ties and only use a belt if you've literally got nothing else to hand. Despite what you see on the movies, belts don't work well as tourniquets. I hate talking about this sort of stuff. I would also highly recommend you get some proper professional first aid training. That is one of my goals for this year, is to get that sorted. If you're working with these sort of tools, it really is essential. You can get an adult first aid course for about £40 or thereabouts. It only lasts a few hours, so it's definitely worth getting that done. Loads of organisations provide this service. In the UK, look up the British Red Cross as a good starting point. Also, of course, if you employ staff, you need to complete a proper workplace training course in first aid. They typically cost £300–400 or thereabouts, normally last about 3 days. I'll pop some links in the description below, but there's loads of organisations provide that sort of service and I would highly recommend it. Also, if you're happy looking at blood and a bit of gore and open wounds and that sort of thing, Alex Steele did an excellent series of videos all about kind of slightly more extreme workshop related injuries. They are definitely worth a watch, but only if you've got a strong stomach. Link in the description below to Alex's videos. They are awesome. Hopefully I haven't put you off woodworking too much, but these are all seriously dangerous tools and they need to be treated with absolute care and respect. Next time we're going to cover a few workshop basics and it'll hopefully stop you from getting injured in the first place, so don't forget to hit subscribe. You can also sign up to my very occasional newsletter so you can be kept up to date with what's happening on the channel. Links in the description below. For now, have a very safe and productive year, and I shall catch you next time. Bye!